Hello and welcome. I'm Todd McDermott, WPBF 25 News. This event tonight, you may be seeing either live or in the future, is called Get the Facts on the Vax. Welcome our viewers from YouTube channel, our Twitter account, as well as our Facebook page to this live event featuring experts on infectious diseases, doctors answering your questions about the vaccine. I want to start by bringing in Dr. Larry Bush, infectious disease specialist and the past president of the Palm Beach County Medical Society. Dr. Bush, I should also mention you were lead investigator in the AstraZeneca trials here in Palm Beach County, overseeing, I believe, 350 patients in the trials for those vaccine doses as well. Thank you so much for doing this with us tonight.
Good evening. Thanks for asking me. My pleasure.
All right, listen, let's start with this is open to a lot of questions. I know a lot of people are still considering the vaccine for their children. They may have a lot of questions. We have a lot of questions and also a lot of answers from a team of doctors tonight. I want to start with a question to you, and it's pretty open-ended here. And that is, if you would address perhaps the biggest and most important myth you'd like to address tonight regarding COVID-19 vaccines that you've been asked or heard about from the general public.
Sure. The biggest one is, does the vaccine really work? We don't know. The second one is, the vaccine, we don't know how safe it will be. Well, that's not true. These vaccines are used not just in the United States, but worldwide, and they clearly have decreased the amount of cases, the amount of hospitalizations, the amount of transmission, and the amount of death from COVID. So we do know that they do work. When it gets to how safe they are, there have been millions of people who have been dosed with 1 or 2 injections with these 3 available, or actually worldwide, there are 4 available vaccines. And although there are quite a few reports of mild to moderate side effects, what we do know is the long-term effect of the vaccine and the severity of any side effect greatly is much less than the long-term side effects and what can happen if you do get COVID. Look at the amount of people that have died in this country, the amount of people that have died worldwide. It rivals any pandemic that humans have ever seen on planet Earth. So do they work? Yes. Were they created too quickly? No, this science has been known before. It was just rapidly developed because of all the parties involved at once. And are they safe? Well, there's millions of people who can testify the fact that they are.
And before we get to our first question here for an answer from our team of doctors, let me go further with the side effects very quickly with you. And that is, a lot of people refer to the side effects as if they are suffering symptoms of the coronavirus itself, and that also is not true.
Correct. When we get infected with a virus, whether it's influenza or coronavirus, our body responds to it. The response is an inflammatory immune response, and you get symptoms, whether they're low-grade fever, achiness, fatigue, soreness at the site of the injection, even things like diarrhea or difficulty sleeping. But the same thing happens when you inject any foreign substance into your body. That's your immune system reacting to it, and those are the symptoms of the immune system battle going on in your body. So with the vaccine, the immune system recognizes it as a foreign substance, it responds to it, it forms a protective antibody so that if you get exposed again later, and while you're now exposed, it will fight that virus.
All right, let's jump into some of our other questions for doctors. I want to start with, will the vaccine have any impact on fertility? The answer from Dr. Lisa Gwynn.
Vaccines have never had any impact on fertility. Why should this one be any different?
All right, short and succinct. Dr. Bush, are there other factors here? I know people are worried about their long-term health if they take the vaccine. Have you heard other people ask you questions about, well, will it do this to me? Will it do that to me beyond the side effects?
Yeah, it's basically, will it change my immunology or will it change my DNA? Because we've heard that these are messenger RNA, which is another type of what we call nucleic acid in the body, and will it change mine? In no which way has that been proven in any phase of any of these trials going on with messenger RNA vaccines, which actually have been looked at for 50 years, first investigated in Philadelphia at the University of Pennsylvania. There's no evidence of that whatsoever. And now we have an experiment with multiple millions of people. That is strictly a myth. That is not going to happen.
And you did say that word experiment. I know you addressed this off the top, but these are emergency use authorized vaccines, but this isn't an experiment anymore at all.
No, it's not an experiment. The reason why it's called emergency use authorization, that category first came into effect right after the anthrax attacks 20 years ago. And that was because the government decided we have to have a mechanism to supply vaccines and medications on an emergency use that we don't have the time to wait the usual 2 to 4 years to see the long-term benefit or detriment of the vaccine. So after these trials were done rapidly, whether it was the Pfizer or the Moderna or the Johnson & Johnson and now the AstraZeneca, the FDA feels that they have enough information to say from all we know that the benefit and the safety greatly is larger, much larger than what we know about COVID. And therefore, for emergency use, we're going to approve it. But remember, the ongoing effects are being monitored by the FDA. And if going forward, it's decided that the vaccine doesn't really give you protective immunity for a long time or has side effects that we didn't anticipate, it will not get full approval. So these are not approved vaccines. They're emergency use authorized. Full approval will come after 2 to 4 years of their use.
All right. Well, we know the Pfizer vaccine is now approved in this country for children as young as 12. On the other side of this next clip, we'll talk more about that. I want to go to this question, and it's what you would say to a parent who's hesitant about giving the vaccine to their child. And this is from Dr. Tommy Schechtman.
It's understandable. This is all new, so there certainly are going to be questions. But the vaccine is safe, it's efficacious, it works. I think the study that Pfizer completed showed that it was 100% effective. And so I think that's really important.
And Dr. Bush, are you aware of side effects when it comes to children? I know Pfizer is now approved for emergency use authorization. I believe that Moderna will not be far behind, nor will J&J, perhaps later this summer. You may have a better idea of the timeline. But first, do you know of any other side effects or the severity of side effects in children receiving these vaccines?
None at all. So far, the trials with those that have been approved for children down to 12 years old, Pfizer, and the trials ongoing with the others have not shown any serious adverse event, unexpected, or that would shut that trial down. When you think about how many vaccines children receive, some of them live viruses, measles, mumps, German measles, chickenpox, that's actually injecting your child with a live virus that's been attenuated. Here, there's no virus at all that's active in this vaccine. It's all particles that your immune system responds to. So I would have actually less concern about giving a child this vaccine than a potential live virus vaccine. That's not to say you shouldn't use those attenuated live viruses for children. It's to say that you should feel comfortable with the knowledge that we have.
And do you anticipate that we will see the Moderna and Johnson & Johnson vaccines and perhaps the AstraZeneca vaccine as well also be approved for use in the youngest Americans going forward here this year?
Yes, we will have to, because if we don't, the point of reaching herd immunity where you protect those who are not immune won't be reached because of the amount of the population that is comprised of children. And make no mistake, children may not get symptomatic or mildly symptomatic, but they do get disease and they do spread the disease within households, within the community. If you look at the average age of the diagnosed case in Palm Beach County right now and the state of Florida, it's around 33 years old. That's the median. That means there's quite a few people under that age who are becoming infected. Those are the children. So it's still a concern in children, although obviously they're not having the severity of disease that adults do.
I want to go back to that question of herd immunity very quickly. This is a question, is herd immunity now out of reach? And the answer from infectious disease doctor, Dr. Joseph Etienne.
Hopefully, with the children, the adolescents being vaccinated, and keep in mind they make up 20% of our population, so we might get close to that herd immunity, but we may not get there completely.
I'm sorry, there's Dr. Camino as well. Dr. Bush, as far as herd immunity goes, we've heard a lot of differing numbers here. At one point, it was going to be 70% or 80% of the US population. We're nowhere near that now, and there's been a huge vaccination push, and there continues to be a public relations push now because the first wave of people who wanted the vaccine has really passed. Is there a number that the medical community has out there where we might achieve herd immunity? Is that still a possibility in your mind?
I think it is, but there's only two ways of getting there, either by natural infection, which will eventually will happen. Everybody who's going to become infected from exposure will. That's how the 1918 pandemic Spanish flu ended. There were no vaccines. The herd immunity was accomplished by natural infection, and those who were going to survive did, and they were now immune. But the determination of the number for this is estimated to be around 70 to 80%. And as we see more variants, although they may not be more virulent as far as causing more severe disease, they may be more contagious. And therefore that number could rise because the percent of people who have to either have had disease or becoming vaccinated to, quote, create herd immunity depends on how contagious your virus is. For example, the most contagious or one of the most contagious respiratory viruses we know is measles, where 95% of the population needs to be immune either by being infected or a vaccine. And we know that recently by seeing that in states that lessened their requirement for measles vaccine for children, all of a sudden the last few years we had the largest outbreak of measles that we've ever had because herd immunity waned. So for right now, for COVID, it's estimated based on its infectivity to be around 70 to 80% of the country's population.
So we would have a long way to go. I want to diverge from vaccines just a minute and talk about the virus itself, if you would. And I want to point out on our newscast today, the latest information from the state is we had nearly 3,000 new infections. It was 2,800 something, and nearly 100 more deaths linked directly to COVID-19. And that would seem to point out that while many people are getting vaccinated, we've opened up, we now have different masking guidelines from the CDC for vaccinated Americans. The pandemic really it appears to be far from over.
Absolutely, because people may not understand that the efficacy numbers they hear of vaccine are for symptomatic COVID, which means somebody who got COVID and had symptoms was considered a vaccine failure. But it doesn't tell you how many people developed COVID or were infected with COVID who had no symptoms. They're not counted as a failure. And those people definitely, to some degree, can transmit disease. So although the vaccine is very good at protecting people from becoming symptomatic and severe and extremely good at protecting people from getting disease that would lead them to hospitalization or death, it doesn't totally protect against becoming infected. And as we know, 40% of people who do become infected in this country with COVID are asymptomatic, and around 30% of infections are spread by asymptomatic persons. So we can't let our guard down. And although masking has been lifted, it's an individual decision on how safe you feel. I don't think it's harmful to wear a mask. It depends on how you feel. But keep in mind, it is an added layer of protection until we achieve that herd immunity.
And just as an aside, the masks, I personally, not being a medical expert at all, but just amazed by the lack of a flu epidemic this year. Would you attribute that directly to the masking?
Exactly. The amount of flu epidemic this year is lowest it's been in many years, probably because of the masking. But not only that, last year had the least amount of tuberculosis cases in the United States ever, which is also a respiratory spread disease. I attribute that for a few reasons, one of which is masking.
I want to go back to the question of children and the vaccine. And this is a question for Dr. Lisa Gwynn. And the question is the vaccine recommended for children with chronic health conditions? Let's listen.
So the vaccine is definitely going to be safer than if your grandson actually gets the coronavirus. So I would highly recommend going ahead and getting the vaccine.
Dr. Bush, children or adults, obviously are there people there who you would still recommend don't get the vaccine, or perhaps time it in some way? Or is it just more important for everyone to be vaccinated to protect themselves from the effects of COVID?
It's more important to be vaccinated. Now, it's true that people with immune system defects are on medications that lower your immune system. We're not in any of these trials. So you can't look at the trial and say, how did they respond? Did they have more side effects? But we also know on the flip side of that coin is those persons, when they get infected with COVID, as the doctor just said, do have much more severe disease and do poorly. Um, the only person I would not want to see vaccinated right now is somebody who clearly has an anaphylactic reaction to one of the components of the vaccine. And the physicians know the components, and they can tell by your history whether there's anything in there that you've reacted to that badly before.
Since we're talking about vaccines and the side effects, where's the situation as far as other vaccines? Obviously, we vaccinate our children against a wide variety of childhood diseases. There is the flu vaccine. Are we going to be at a stage here where the COVID vaccine becomes part of the vaccine regimen? Before we even talk about boosters, can you get the coronavirus vaccine while being vaccinated against other diseases?
Initially, the recommendation from the CDC was to wait 14 days before or after before you would get a separate vaccine, let's say a pneumonia vaccine or a flu vaccine. As of yesterday, the CDC lifted that recommendation and said you can have multiple vaccines at different sites, injection, at the same time. So the more you can get vaccinated against all these respiratory diseases, the better off we'll all be. And having said that, knowing that these messenger RNA vaccines are working so well, the companies are now looking at using that technology to make vaccines against things like Epstein-Barr virus and cytomegalovirus and other common diseases that are spread. So this may actually be science that we learn going forward because of the COVID epidemic or pandemic and the vaccine initiative.
Let's talk about boosters now specifically. Do you expect that those of us who have been vaccinated will be required to get or need booster shots? And I know that there is still a lot of research to be done, but when would you anticipate we would need boosters?
I think there's two reasons why we may need boosters. One, to give us a similar vaccine for COVID that has the variants that are now popular in the area. And secondly, is if it starts to be shown that the immunity we get from the vaccine starts to wane and is not protective any longer. So those are some of the reasons we get an influenza vaccine different every year. The immunity is not very long lasting, and the strain of influenza next year may not be the same. So yes, I do anticipate there's a very good chance for one reason or another we'll be receiving boosters as part of our yearly vaccination schedule.
All right, well, whether it's 6 months or a year away from after the time you get your shot, I'm sure a lot of people are wondering, since there's a 2-shot regimen for Moderna, 2-shot regimen for Pfizer, 1 shot for the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, and would we anticipate that the booster would be a single dose?
Yes, I think the boosters will wind up being a single dose. And you may or may not know, but right now Johnson & Johnson is actively still conducting a 2-dose trial to see if 2 doses are better than 1. I'm the principal investigator in one of the sites here in Palm Beach County. If that information turns true and the 2 doses for Johnson & Johnson are superior to 1, people who received 1 likely will be invited back for a second.
Dr. Bush, Johnson & Johnson for the single dose, were they at about 79% efficacy?
Right, depending on the age, depending
Okay.
on where it was done in the age population. Remember, efficacy is symptomatic disease, but it was 100% protective against severe disease leading to hospitalization and death.
And since I have you, and because you led the trials here in Palm Beach County and AstraZeneca, are we going to see that 4th vaccine get approved in the U.S.?
I believe it will. Remember, that's been the vaccine used mostly throughout the world because it's been available in Europe and India and Mexico and other parts for many, many months. There was a report that came out yesterday from the UK that said that it proved to be 85% effective after 2 doses. So I know that the AstraZeneca folks are looking at all their data. They want to make sure it's very clean and clear with no questions, and then they're going to present it to the FDA for approval. I anticipate that happening shortly.
And what about as far as we have the 2 mRNA vaccines, the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, will you be required to get a booster that's the same as your original shot?
That's a good question. Since all these vaccines stimulate your immune system to produce the same type of protective antibody, the thinking is, and it's been looked at in studies, that you can switch the vaccines later on for boosters and boost with a different vaccine. In other words, what's available to the patient at that time. So I think that's likely going to be the way that we go in the future.
Let's go back to children for a second, because I know there are a lot of studies going on for children as young as 2. And obviously, you were talking about herd immunity, and children will have to be vaccinated for us to ever get close to that and perhaps stamp out this virus in the U.S. When might we anticipate? Will it be next year at the earliest that we see vaccines for very young children?
You know, the way they're quickly enrolling people in these trials, and you can see how quickly Pfizer was able to present their data in children between 15 down to 12. I think you'll see it by the end of the year. There'll be information on people too. Those trials are a little bit harder to enroll because, you know, parents are very reluctant to enroll very young children in these vaccine trials, especially since those children are already receiving so many vaccines. But I think you'll see that by the end of the year. Then it will be a question of parents saying this is just another childhood vaccine, along with whooping cough, pertussis, and measles, and chickenpox, and all the others.
As a parent of young children, sometimes I'm amazed at the number of vaccines that do get put in your child at the same time. I mean, we try to break them up, but usually they're done in groups, and there are a lot of shots for the kids to get. What else are you telling parents who may have questions? I mean, you know, I'm sure that right now, parents who want the vaccine for their children but still have questions are peppering you with questions. What are you hearing, and how are you answering?
The question is, I've heard children don't get infected. That's not true. I heard they do not get very ill. That is true. I've heard they don't pass it on to adults. That is not true. Maybe to a lesser extent, because more virus is spread, the sicker you are, and they're not very sick. And then I hear that the vaccine cannot be safe in children because they never looked at it. And I tell them that's how all these childhood vaccines started. But meanwhile, the childhood vaccine schedule, by the time they go to first grade, is 27 vaccines, approximately.
Wow.
Some of them, as you said, in combination. So I'm telling them I would trust the science. I mean, evidence is evidence. And if people don't believe the evidence, then there's nothing you're going to do to prove it to them. If it's a bias, you know, you can't convert bias. Evidence you can use with, you know, common sense and knowledge.
Let me talk about the big global picture right now, if you would with me for a second, because we're talking about our families, our children, ourselves being vaccinated. But we in the US are really far ahead of a lot of the world, not necessarily Great Britain, but many other countries are struggling. Parts of Canada are struggling right now, getting enough people vaccinated. They're shutting down activities in Ontario. We know that Japan is looking at another wave of the virus. They are very low percentage of vaccinated people. That's going to keep this virus alive and spreading and hurting and killing people for some time, isn't it?
Yes, it is, unfortunately, because we live in a global society and travel. I mean, the airline network on any given 24-hour period is huge. You can get from anywhere to anywhere in less than a day. But also keep in mind, we live in a little bit bubble. Although we're the 3rd most populated country in the world, we make up less than 5% of the world's total population. So we're really small. We're the 3rd most populated, but we're really small in the terms of the percent of the population that we make up. And therefore, these variants are arriving here and they spread in this country. You don't have to go to South Africa to get the South African variant. It's here. That's what may infect you on any one given day. So we have to be concerned about the rest of the world not being vaccinated. And, you know, that's one of the things about the AstraZeneca vaccine. One, they've claimed that they can make billions of doses very rapidly and they have them ready. And 2, there is no expense for the vaccine. They're giving the vaccine for free throughout the world.
And this AstraZeneca vaccine, correct me if I'm wrong, this has like a 6-month, half a year life if it's refrigerated. Is that right?
Correct. It doesn't need freezing. It's put in a refrigerator just like you would put any other product that can last in your refrigerator for 6 months. Having said that, they haven't presented their data to the FDA yet to claim that it is, you know, available and useful and safe in the United States. On the other hand, it is the major vaccine used throughout the world. But fortunately, right now we have options. We have Johnson & Johnson and Moderna and Pfizer-BioNTech. So we have others. And there's other companies making vaccines too that we haven't heard about yet.
And if I could briefly, before we wrap up here in just a couple of minutes, if you would address that I believe it's the B1617 variant in India. India is having the greatest problem in the world that we know of overall in their population. Is that the variant we need to be most concerned about? And what do we know about the current vaccines fighting off that variant of the virus?
We don't know a lot yet, because you have to remember that when these trials were done, the vaccines I just mentioned, the variants were very few in number, and therefore those people were not necessarily in the trial. But they're looking at now to see if people who've been vaccinated, if they're getting infected with these variants, meaning the vaccine was not protective against them. And so far, the data looks good. I think the issue in India is that they make up such a large percent of the world's population that social distancing there was not as easily done as here, and that the percent of vaccinees has been extremely low to this date for many, many reasons, some of which are political, social, some are economic, some are just logistics. But the variant is concerning, because the more the virus gets to replicate, the more it gets to mutate. And the more it gets to mutate, the more likely it is not to be protected against our vaccines don't protect against it. Keep in mind, the virus cannot exist outside of a human. So it has to find a way to infect another human and replicate. It's trying to go on and on and on. So it has to fool our immune system. If we shut down the ones before they can do that by getting everybody vaccinated, we will win this battle quickly.
I want you to do a math estimate for me, and I apologize for doing this, but because we need so many vaccines that have to go to the four corners of the earth to get enough people vaccinated to really knock out this virus, when might we even have enough doses to actually do that? And you mentioned, besides the four companies we're talking about, there is Sinopharm and others that are out there. But when might we get to have enough doses to actually stop this?
I think we're going to be looking into 2022 before a large percent of the world is vaccinated. And again, a large percent of the world lives in areas greatly populated. China has their own vaccine. Russia has a different vaccine that we don't even talk about. Brazil's using different vaccines, and those are heavily populated countries. The data on how well those vaccines work, we're not all privy to all the details, but it's going to be a while. You're talking about close to 8 billion people in the world. That's a lot of people when you look at how many people need to get vaccinated, sometimes vaccinated twice.
Just the logistics of getting those doses to all those people obviously be a challenge. But I want to end on the most positive note I can, Doctor, and that is your best case scenario for the American population this calendar year as we see more people get vaccinated. What's the best we can hope for during 2021 now that we are approaching that half a year mark?
I think come the next school season and the holiday season, that if people step up and get vaccinated, that we can get back to as close of a common normal society and function that we do here as it's going to be. And I think that can happen before the end of the year, particularly the school year and the holiday season. But the people who are, quote, on the fence have to get off the fence. And the people who are biased, you know what? They're going to be protected by the people who are willing to go get vaccinated. We are going to protect them. When people say, should I get vaccinated? I say, I got vaccinated the first day the vaccine was out. So did my wife, so did my children who are adults. So therefore, that's my answer. First day, couldn't wait to get vaccinated. So if they do that, they will protect the people who will never get off the fence, who have a bias against vaccine. Those people will be protected because of your willingness to protect them.
Well, I know that whether people get vaccinated or not, we all would like to return to that quote unquote normal life in the future. Dr. Larry Bush, thank you so much for doing this with us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you for all your work in the study of these vaccines. We know we'll call on you again. So thanks again.
That. Thank you.
And thank you for joining us for this event, Get the Facts on the Vax. I'm Todd McDermott. We'll see you later.